Dukkha. To understand the benefits of the teachings on dukkha, one must examine this characteristic in relation to two key teachings, the three characteristics and the Four Noble Truths. Given that all conditioned things exist as an aggregate of fleeting components and are subject to birth, transmutation, and demise, conforming to the law of impermanence, things are a venue for change and conflict. They are thoroughly instilled with impending rupture and decay. To sustain a desired object, or to steer the flow of change in a desired direction, requires energy and guidance. The more complex and numerous the components, the greater the effort, and more meticulous the means required to engage with them. To influence something, one must act at its underlying causes and know the relative importance of these causes. Such wise action leads to an end of suffering. In contrast, action prompted by misguided attachment leads to oppression. According to the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, our sole responsibility, kiccha, in the face of dukkha, is accurate knowledge, pariññā. This correct response to suffering is essential, and yet it tends to get overlooked. Buddhadhamma teaches not to increase our suffering, but to know suffering, to deal with it skillfully, and to be free of it, to realize true happiness. In other words, the teaching on the Four Noble Truths instruct us to investigate and accurately understand personal problems before trying to solve them. Investigation of problems does not imply creating or inflicting ourselves with more. On the contrary, it is a method for eliminating problems. People who are not aware of the responsibility adjoined by the Noble Truths may react to suffering inappropriately and aimlessly, and may increase their suffering by viewing the world negatively. These two dimensions of dukkha, the universal and the personal, and the skillful response enjoined by the teachings mentioned above, determine the practical value of this characteristic. The rise and disintegration of things reveals an inherent frailty and imperfection. Passage of time amplifies this deficiency as alterations occur within and surrounding an object. Consequently, things must continually struggle to sustain their form or to improve. For human beings, maintaining a higher quality of life and reaching fulfillment requires constant revision and refinement. Our impulsive resistance to the conflicts arising from change generally leads to more harm than good, irrespective of the matter involved, a material object, another person, or a community. An appreciation of proper adaptation and improvement is essential, and points again to the importance of wisdom, which engages with all things in harmony with cause and effect. Ordinary happiness falls within the domain of the characteristic of dukkha. Such happiness is inherently flawed in the sense that it is subject to change, and therefore it is not fully satisfying. People who place their hope in this form of happiness essentially align themselves with the imperfection, or fall into the stream of change. They are thus swept in whichever direction the current goes. When disappointed, the anguish is equal to the expectation for joy. Searching for happiness in this way is tantamount to enslavement or to gambling with life. It is incumbent on us to apply mindfulness and clear comprehension while deriving pleasure from these transient forms of happiness. Despite the vacillation of worldly joys, one should minimize the harmful repercussions with the resolve, whatever happens, may I protect freedom of the heart. Happiness is of two kinds: happiness satisfying various forms of desire, and happiness of a spacious heart. A heart free from mental obstructions and free from the need for personal gratification. The first kind of happiness can be subdivided into two kinds: happiness derived from gratifying unwholesome desire, tanha, craving, and happiness derived from fulfilling wholesome desire, chanda. The first kind is gratification by way of the five senses, by which one focuses on deriving pleasure from people or things in a selfish way. The second kind is a fulfillment of a desire for people or things to be well and complete. This wholesome desire, chanda, prompts one to act in order to help bring about such wellness and completion. It is a vital factor for nurturing virtue and for spiritual development, leading to more profound kinds of happiness and acting as a link to the second kind of happiness, of a spacious heart. This wholesome desire, however, is often overlooked by people, as if it is concealed or hidden behind the desire of craving. It will be discussed at more length in another chapter. Here the discussion is limited to sense pleasure, which the majority of people get caught up with and obsess over. Sense pleasure is almost an opposite to the second kind of happiness, which is spacious and tranquil, free from such obstructions like anxiety and stress, which bind and oppress the mind. Pleasure based on sense contact is dependent on external conditions in order to gratify desire. The disposition of the mind enthralled with this form of happiness is prevailing agitation, possessiveness, and self-obsession. When not restrained, these selfish qualities cause problems. It is natural that this form of happiness, dependent on material objects, samisa sukha, leads in some degree to addiction and disturbance, since it results from an attempt to compensate for a feeling of lack or loss. The second kind of happiness is independent of external sense objects. It is a self-reliant and unconditional state of mind. Its distinguishing features are purity, uncontaminated by defilement, luminosity, accompanied by profound, immeasurable wisdom, prepared for investigation, peace, an absence of anxiety or agitation, relaxed and tranquil, freedom, free of mental obstruction, spacious, non-attached, and buoyant, full of loving kindness, compassion, and appreciative joy. Fulfillment, no feelings of inadequacy or loneliness, satisfied, inherently complete, if compared to the body, akin to having good health. The two most significant qualities of this state of mind are freedom and wisdom. Together they manifest in the mind as equanimity, upekkha, an evenness and balance of mind which engages with things in an unbiased way. This profound happiness, Niramisa Sukha, is of supreme benefit to human conduct. It is untroubled and is instrumental in solving problems. One can say that it is beyond happiness, and is thus referred to as freedom from suffering. It signals the end of defect and insecurity. Human beings normally seek the first form of happiness, of sense pleasure, samisa sukha, but they cannot always obtain or keep desired objects at will, because these things are subject to external influences and are transient. One must therefore try to establish the second kind of happiness, at least enough to live at ease in the world and to minimize suffering. One will then know how to relate to sensual happiness without causing distress for oneself and others. Understanding the three characteristics engenders this supreme happiness and leads to non-attachment. Happiness dependent on external conditions requires the interaction between two parties, for example, between two persons, or a person and an object. Both parties, however, possess the characteristic of dukkha. They are impaired by inherent conflict. Friction between two such entities increases in proportion to the misguided behavior of the persons involved. An example is of two people, one who seeks pleasure and the other who is the object of desire. Both persons possess inherent deficiency. The former is not always equipped to partake of pleasure, and the latter is not always in a state to be enjoyed. It is impossible that either always gains. If they do not realize or accept this fact, they will hold their gratification as the criterion for happiness, causing strife and irritation. Furthermore, a person's fixation on an object includes possessiveness and a wish to sustain the affiliation forever. This behavior sets a person in opposition to the natural causal process. Such lack of wisdom, applying gratification as the measure for behavior, is just foolhardy defiance, leading to the numerous expressions of suffering. Apart from two parties interacting, additional elements often play a special participatory role. For example, when two people desire the same object, frustrated desire tends to create contention, leading to competition, arguments and theft, all of which are symptoms of suffering. The more people attend to the problems with attachment, the more intense is the ensuing anguish, but the greater the application of wisdom, the less that problems remain. Ignorance, moha, leads to selfishness and greed, lobha. Unable to acquire a desired object, a person then becomes angry, dosa. Many other vices spring from these three root defilements, for example, stinginess, jealousy, mistrust, restlessness, anxiety, ill will, and laziness, generating ever-increasing internal discord. These impurities divorce people from nature's harmony. The repercussion of such denial is a feeling of oppression and stress, nature's penalty system. Hence, the dukkha of nature is compounded, creating more intense pain for human beings. For example, feelings of tension, dullness, embarrassment, agitation, insecurity, and depression. Psychological disturbances and related physical illnesses. Ordinary physical pain, for example, the pain experienced during sickness, which is unduly exacerbated because of craving and clinging. Escalating misery brought about by causing distress and discomfort for others. increased social conflicts resulting from individuals inflaming their defilements. The consequence is social decline and turmoil. By engaging with things with ignorance, stubbornly resisting the flow of nature, and succumbing to desire, the dukkha of formations, sankhara dukkha, erupts as pain, dukkha dukkha. The alternative is to engage with things wisely, based on an accurate understanding of the truth. People with such understanding know that the dukkha, that is an attribute of formations, is simply a part of nature. They do not struggle and create surplus conflict. Knowing that to grasp these formations would lead to suffering, they abstain from such grasping. By accepting this truth, they do not breed defilements. They know how to live in harmony with nature by exercising virtues which promote inner spaciousness and peace. Such virtues include loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, appreciative joy, mudita, equanimity, upekkha, social concord, samadhi, cooperation, self-sacrifice, self-restraint, patience, humility, and circumspection. These virtues counter the many vices, for example, hatred, hostility, jealousy, dissension, greed, self-indulgence, obstinacy, arrogance, fear, mistrust, indolence, infatuation, absent-mindedness, and credulity. This harmonious and wise way of conducting our lives, of taking best advantage of nature's laws, not forfeiting our freedom, and not clinging, is the most excellent way to live, as extolled by the Buddha. Life with wisdom is the supreme life.